Geography, according to the Oxford Dictionary of the English Language, is the study of the Earth's surface. This term originates from the Greek words geo meaning earth, and graphein meaning writing. Maps, on the other hand, are visual representations, often on a flat surface, depicting all or part of a particular area. The word map comes from the French term mappemonde, which is derived from the Latin phrase mappa mundi, meaning a sheet or napkin of the world. In essence, maps can be thought of as a form of written expression stemming from geography. They are a way of inscribing information onto the landscape, albeit in a symbolic sense. The creation and use of maps carry significant cultural and historical weight, especially in relation to the power dynamics between European nations and their colonies. Maps have been instrumental in revealing and shaping these power dynamics. Consequently, they hold a vital role in post-colonial theory and the study of post-colonial literature. The Babylonians were among the earliest people to create maps. They made a detailed plan of the city of Babylon around 2200 BCE. They were also the first to use the four main directions we know today: north, south, east, and west. The Egyptians also had early maps, like the Turin Papyrus, which showed a gold mine. However, the Greeks are seen as the founders of geography as a proper science. Crates made the first globe, which is a round representation of the Earth. Even today, the globe is considered the most accurate way to show the Earth's shape. The Greeks faced a challenge in showing a round Earth on a flat surface. A person named Hipparchus tried different ways to do this, creating what we now call the stereographic and orthographic projections. These projections try to keep the shapes of landmasses right, but one makes areas near the edges look too big compared to the middle, and the other does the opposite. Although early Greek geographers were the first mapmakers, it's Eratosthenes who's seen as the father of geography as a formal discipline. He figured out the Earth's size by measuring the shadow of the sun at two different places, Alexandria and Syene, assuming they were on the same line around the Earth. Today's technology has shown that his estimate was pretty accurate. We learn a lot about these early Greek geographers from a book called Geographia, written by a Roman named Strabo in the 1st century BCE. The ancient era of geography came to an end when Ptolemy wrote his Guide to Geography in the 2nd century CE. However, his ideas led to a long period of incorrect and unfounded geographical beliefs that lasted for about 1500 years. Ptolemy believed that the Earth was motionless at the center of the universe. He also thought that regions near the equator were too hot for human habitation. Additionally, he greatly underestimated the distance between Europe and Asia, thinking it was all ocean. This led Christopher Columbus to believe he had reached Asia when he arrived in the Americas in 1492. One of Ptolemy's significant contributions was turning map-making into an art form. Unlike his predecessors, who left blank spaces on their maps for unexplored areas, Ptolemy filled these spaces with imaginative ideas. Later map-makers followed this tradition by adding mythical creatures or stories to represent unknown continents like Africa and the Americas. After the fall of the Roman Empire, there were very few advancements in geography, and it became more about imaginative ideas than actual science. Ptolemy's theories remained dominant until the Renaissance. In 1538, a cartographer named Mercator created a groundbreaking map. It showed the world as two heart-shaped pictures of a globe, one from the top and one from the bottom. This type of representation is now called a spherical projection, and it's the closest flat representation of the Earth to a globe. While this map became widely used, it wasn't very practical for navigators during the Age of Exploration. In 1569, Mercator made a more practical map known as the Mercator projection. While it distorted the size of land masses near the poles, it used a grid pattern of lines for longitude and latitude, making it much more useful for oceanic navigation near the equator. Over the next 400 years, map making advanced through exploration and improved technology. Areas once thought to be separate islands, like Florida and India, were discovered to be connected to larger land masses. The fanciful ideas of monsters and cannibals were replaced by more accurate depictions of colonies and territorial boundaries. However, geography and mapping became tools used by European colonial powers to assert control over large parts of the world. For colonial powers, creating accurate maps was vital for several reasons. It helped them plan trade routes and establish colonies in places beyond Europe that they weren't familiar with. Maps also allowed them to understand the regions they controlled and the valuable resources within them. Knowing the geography and physical boundaries of these areas gave them the authority to draw political lines and set up colonial territories. David Turnbull, in comparing European maps with primitive Australian Aboriginal maps, highlights a key difference. Western maps possess greater power because they enable forms of organization that facilitate the creation of empires. They also introduce concepts like cartography, map making, and the idea of owning land, which can be regulated by legal processes. Turnbull also notes that different map projections, which have varying distortions in how they represent space, may be favored based on which regions they emphasize. For example, in the well-known Mercator projection, Britain and Europe appear relatively larger compared to most of the colonized world. While using these types of geographic representations may not explicitly assert power, their influence on how we perceive regions and nations is significant. In essence, the ability to map was crucial for European nations to exert control over much of the world. Mapping, to some extent, implies claiming ownership. In the 20th century, the end of imperialism led to a legacy of imposed geography, and the creation of many newly independent nations, based on colonial territorial boundaries. Some modern geographers aim to re-establish geography as an objective science to present landscapes with less bias. Advances in aviation and satellite technology have allowed us to view our planet on a large scale like never before. Post-colonial theorists, on the other hand, seek to demap nations that were formerly colonized, moving away from the landscape imposed by Europe. Edward Said argues that the process of decolonization involves reclaiming both physical and cultural territory, as it was initially mapped by colonial powers. In essence, it aims to align political boundaries with the cultural realities of nations. Maps, being representations, should be understood in the context of whose viewpoint they represent, not just what or where they show. However, Richard Phillips argues that the evolution of maps doesn't always follow a straightforward path. He suggests that while newer maps may be more detailed, they aren't necessarily more accurate. This implies that, despite geographers' efforts, maps are unavoidably influenced by human design, and therefore subject to human biases. Today, technology provides us with maps that are very close to being spatially accurate. Yet, we still have the ability to shape how we represent this spatial landscape to fit our particular biases and needs.